For years, we've all heard that Social Security has a money problem someday, way off in the future. And because it always sounded so distant, most of us filed it away and stopped worrying about it. So today I want to reframe it in a way that actually lands. According to the latest projections, the Retirement Trust Fund is on track to run short in the last few months of 2032. That's fewer than 6 years away, and if you count it the way you actually receive your benefits, one check at a time, that's only about 70 monthly payments from now before an automatic cut could hit. When you think of it as someday, it's easy to ignore. When you think of it as 70 checks, it gets a lot more real. Now, I want to be very clear from the start because there is a lot of fear and a lot of misinformation out there on this topic. And my job here is to give it to you straight, calmly, and without the hype. So let's walk through 3 things. What is actually happening with Social Security's finances? What a shortfall would really mean for your check, and just as importantly, what it would not mean. And then a brand new bill in Congress that takes a very different approach to finally forcing a solution. And at the very end, we'll talk about what all of this does and does not mean for your own retirement plan. Let's start with what's actually going on, because the truth is less dramatic than the headlines and more important than the rumors. Social Security is mostly a pay-as-you-go system. The payroll taxes coming out of today's workers' paychecks largely pay for today's retirees' benefits. For decades, more money was coming in than going out, and that surplus was saved up in what's called the trust fund, essentially a reserve. But the country got older, people are living longer, and there are fewer workers paying in for each retiree drawing out. So now the program pays out a bit more than it takes in each year, and it's been drawing down that reserve to cover the difference. The 2026 trustees reported that's the official annual checkup on the program's finances, projects that the retirement reserve will be depleted in the fourth quarter of 2032. And here is the single most important thing I can tell you in this entire video, because it's the part that gets twisted the most. Social Security does not go bankrupt and disappear in 2032. That is a myth, and it scares people badly for no reason. Even if Congress did absolutely nothing, which would be a historic failure, the money still flowing in from payroll taxes would continue to cover about 78% of the scheduled benefits. So the real risk is not zero. The real risk is a sudden, across-the-board cut of roughly 22%. Still very serious, but a completely different thing than the check stopping. Let me make that 22% concrete, because a percentage is easy to shrug off. Take someone receiving $3,000 a month. A 22% cut is $660 a month gone. That's nearly $8,000 a year for a household that built its entire budget around that income. And this wouldn't just hit future retirees, it would hit people already retired, already relying on that check with no time to adjust. That's why almost nobody in Washington actually believes a cut that size will be allowed to happen. The political consequences would be enormous. But, and this is the frustrating part, we'll probably fix it eventually is exactly the thinking that's gotten us to fewer than 70 checks away with no plan in place. So why hasn't it been fixed already? Congress has known this deadline was coming for decades. The honest answer is that every realistic solution involves trade-offs that somebody won't like, and casting that kind of vote is politically risky. So the issue has become a game of hot potato. Each Congress quietly passes the problem to the next one, hoping someone else will be the one to make the hard choice. And the normal legislative process makes that avoidance easy. A Social Security bill can be introduced with a big press conference, sent off to a committee, and then simply never scheduled for a hearing or a vote. It quietly dies, and almost no one ever has to go on the record. I'm not saying that to be cynical about any one party. Both have done it for a very long time. It's just the reality of the incentives. Which brings us to the new bill, and why it's genuinely different from anything that's come before. It's called the Promise Act, and it was introduced by a bipartisan group of 8 senators, 4 Republicans, 3 Democrats, and 1 independent. Now here's the surprising part. The bill does not raise your taxes. It does not cut anyone's benefits. It does not raise the retirement age. In fact, it contains no Social Security solution at all, not one. Instead of prescribing the fix, it creates a process designed to force lawmakers to produce a real fix, debate it out in the open, and actually vote on it. Here's how it would work. The bill would assign the job of writing the starting proposal, the base plan, to the Social Security Advisory Board. And this is not some new body created by this bill. It's an independent bipartisan federal board that Congress established back in 1994, with up to 7 members split between appointments by the President, the House, and the Senate, with limits so no single party can control it. Its whole purpose is to study Social Security and advise elected officials. Under this bill, the board would gather public input, analyze the options, and then draft actual legislation capable of keeping Social Security solvent for at least 50 years. And that 50-year requirement matters because it means Congress couldn't get away with a flimsy temporary patch that just kicks the can down the road another couple of years. Now, that starting proposal could include any of the tools that are realistically on the table, and I want to lay those out neutrally because there's no magic, painless option. You can bring more money into the system through things like higher payroll taxes or raising the cap on income that gets taxed. You can slow the growth of future benefits. You can adjust the retirement age. You can change the formula used to calculate benefits, or you can combine several of those. Every one of those helps somebody and costs somebody, which is exactly why it's so hard. We don't know yet which mix the proposal would use because that part hasn't been written. But here's the crucial guardrail. The advisory board could only recommend. It could not enact anything. It cannot cut a single check or raise a single tax. That power stays entirely with Congress. Once the board drafted the proposal, it would go to the two committees that handle this in Ways and Means in the House and Finance in the Senate. Those committees could hold hearings, debate it, amend it, even throw it out and replace it with their own plan, as long as their version still hits that same 50-year solvency target. The difference is they'd be working against a deadline, on a fast track, and if they simply did nothing, under the normal process, doing nothing kills a bill. Under the Promise Act, doing nothing lets the proposal keep advancing toward a floor vote anyway. That single reversal is the whole idea. It takes away the quiet death in committee. One way to picture it, the Promise Act doesn't prescribe the medicine. It forces Congress into the exam room, puts the diagnosis on the table, and makes it much harder to walk out without deciding on a treatment. And to be clear, this would not let anything become law automatically. The final legislation would still need a majority in the House, at least 60 votes in the Senate, and the president's signature. So any tax change, any benefit change, any retirement age change would still have to be approved by the elected officials you vote for. The board just writes the first draft. Congress still decides whether it becomes law. Now, this bill is not universally loved, and I want to give you both sides honestly, because you deserve the real debate, not a sales pitch. The case in favor is straightforward. The normal process has failed for literally decades, and delay is not a neutral choice. The longer we wait, the worse every option gets. Gradual changes can be phased in gently over many years, giving people time to adjust. But last-minute changes, made in a panic right at the deadline, have to be bigger, faster, and more disruptive. So supporters say, give the process a real deadline it can't dodge, and finally get everyone on the record.
The case against is also serious, and it's mostly about the timeline. AARP, among others, has come out strongly against the bill as written. Their concern is that the version introduced would give that advisory board only about 6 weeks to produce a 50-year plan and the legislative language for it, for a program that affects roughly 70 million beneficiaries and nearly every worker in the country. That is a stunningly short window for something this big, with very little time for public input. Critics also worry the fast-track process could limit debate and restrict amendments, and that a final vote could land in a lame duck session after an election, when some departing members no longer answer to voters. And they point out that a board of a handful of members drafting the opening plan for the entire nation's retirement system deserves real scrutiny. Those are legitimate concerns, and I don't think anyone should wave them away. My own read, for whatever it's worth, is that the strongest objection is the timeline, not the core idea. 6 weeks is not enough for the public to understand who'd be helped and who'd be hurt by a change this consequential. Lengthen that, give the process enough time to be credible, and the concept of finally forcing a real vote instead of another decade of avoidance has a lot going for it. But reasonable, well-meaning people land on different sides of this, and I genuinely encourage you to make up your own mind. Now let's bring this home to the part that actually matters for you. What should you do about any of this? And my first piece of advice might surprise you. Do essentially nothing differently, at least not yet. Please do not change your Social Security claiming strategy because of a bill that was just introduced. We don't know if the Promise Act will become law. We don't know what the board would recommend, and we don't know what Congress would ultimately pass. Making a permanent decision today based on all of those unknowns is how people hurt themselves. Here's some perspective that should lower your blood pressure a bit. Historically, when Social Security has been reformed, lawmakers have gone out of their way to protect people who are already retired or close to it, and to phase changes in gradually for younger workers who have time to plan. Most of the serious proposals on the table today follow that same pattern. So if you're already retired or nearly there, you are very likely the group any fix would try hardest to shield. That's not a guarantee, but it's the consistent historical pattern, and it's worth knowing. What you can do is build a plan that's durable, no matter what Congress does. And that starts with one simple exercise. Stress test your retirement against a Social Security haircut. Ask yourself honestly, if my benefit were reduced by, say, 20% down the road, would my plan still hold together, or would it fall apart? If the honest answer is it would fall apart, that tells you your plan is leaning too hard on a single source of income. And that's worth addressing now, while you have time and options. A few concrete steps. Log into your own My Social Security account at ssa.gov and look at your actual numbers, not a guess. Remember that delaying your own benefit still increases your check for life, which is one real lever you fully control. And don't build your entire retirement on the assumption that nothing will ever change, because in a program this size, something eventually will. If you want a second set of eyes, a fee-only fiduciary advisor, someone paid by you, not by commissions, can help you run those what-ifs. None of that costs you anything but a little time, and it's the opposite of panicking. So let me leave you with this. The 2032 deadline is real, but the checks are not disappearing, and the sky is not falling. What's true is that the problem is a lot closer than someday, only about 70 monthly payments away. And for the first time, there's a bill designed specifically to make Congress stop dodging it. Whether the Promise Act is the right vehicle, with the right timeline, is a fair debate. But the era of treating this as a distant, comfortable abstraction is over. And I genuinely want to know where you land on this. Do you think Congress should be forced onto a deadline to vote on a Social Security fix? Or does this particular bill give the process too little time to get it right? Tell me down in the comments. I read them, and this is one where your voice actually matters. Because these are the kinds of bills your elected officials pay attention to. If this helped you understand what's really going on, minus the panic, share it with someone who's worried about their benefits. And subscribe so the next Plain English Breakdown finds you. And if you want, drop the word solvent in the comments so I know this one landed. One important note before you go. I'm Tom Miller, and I make these to teach, not to give you personalized financial, tax, or legal advice. And nothing here is a political endorsement of any party, official, or bill. The projections I cited come from the 2026 Social Security Trustees Report and reflect current estimates which change from year to year. The Promise Act is newly introduced legislation whose details could change or which may never become law. Nothing here creates a professional relationship. For decisions about your own benefits and your own plan, review your record directly at ssa.gov and sit down with a qualified fee-only fiduciary advisor or CPA who can look at your full situation. I'll see you in the next one.